Well, good morning, church. We're actually turning back to the book of Daniel after a 6-week break, and I'm certain that every one of you, after hearing the text read, went, I don't know where there's a sermon in that text. So that's why we pray before we start. But really, I've been kind of like, worried about this text ever since I began the book of Daniel, wondering how we were going to handle it. And then the more I've pressed into this text, I really feel like these final chapters, the chapter we're in now, the verses today, and to the end, I think that they really speak to the uncertainty, the anger, fear, and frustration that many of us feel as we look at the world around us. And we've touched on this more than once as we've gone through the book of Daniel, but I think especially here we see it. I mean, just think about the world in which we live in. Putin's invasion of Ukraine has lasted over 2 years. And it's reaching the point that it seems like fewer and fewer people and fewer countries really care if he succeeds. Israel's invasion of Gaza and battle against the evil of Hamas has lasted 6 months. But at the same time, the death toll among innocent non-combatants has been horrific. We look around the world, we see China's aggression towards Taiwan is continuing to grow. But it doesn't seem like a whole lot of people are very worried about it. And if we turn from the world stage just to our own country, there's countless reasons for uncertainty, anger, and fear as well in our own country. I mean, our national debt is at $35 trillion. That is $100,000 for each and every citizen of the United States, down to those who were just born last night. Speaking of citizens, at the very moment that our government is ignoring the flood of undocumented immigrants at our borders, it's fighting to enshrine the right of Americans to murder our unborn citizens. It's fighting to normalize the mutilation of confused and helpless children. And at the same time, trying to destroy the most basic privacy that our daughters and our wives deserve. And if that's not enough, we have the frustrating quagmire of our current election cycle. So I just want to ask, is anybody riled up yet? I mean, there's probably at least one issue for everybody in that pile. I mean, blood pressure starting to rise. Well, this morning, I'm not trying to provoke your anger. And I don't want to lose you on political issues. What I want to do is expose the ground of your hope. Where are you looking for hope today? What is the true grounds of hope in your life? Is the ultimate ground of your hope your political party? Is your ultimate hope in its politicians? In their platform of things that they want to do? Is that where your hope is really at? Is our hope in the ballot box? Or is your ultimate hope in the good and sovereign rule of God over all things? Where's your hope? Because the main idea of our text that I want to pull out today is this. Don't trust. Don't trust in the kingdoms of men because their fragile plans are subject to the sovereign hand of God. Don't trust in them. Their fragile plans are subject to the sovereign hand of God. That's what we're going to see in these 20 verses this morning. They cover 400 years of human history. That's 537 BC to 175 BC. That is the time frame that's covered in these verses. And they contain the most detailed, historically verifiable prophecy in the Old Testament. Those are the verses that we have in front of us. Those are the verses that Corey just read. And I need to warn you that as we start into the message this morning, it's going to feel a little bit more like a history lesson than a sermon. In fact, I kind of got a chuckle that Jeff Kreifels is in the nursery today. Of all places for him to be. But as we go through here, I'm not ultimately worried if you remember the dates or if you remember the names that we're going to walk through. No, I want you to be listening for all of the ways that the plans of men fall apart and come to nothing. If nothing else, listen to all of the plans that are made and all of the plans that fail. So as we finally turn to this prophecy this morning, the final thing I want to let you know is the outline this morning, it's not mine. It's from Dr. Jared Compton. I really struggled to outline this, and I came across his outline and went, yes, I love it. 9 things that God shows to Daniel and 2 things that God shows to us to make us have something to grab onto as we go through this text this morning. So let's turn to the 9 things. 9 things that God shows Daniel. So we're going to be moving through history quickly. There's some fill in the blanks to help you kind of keep focused as we're going through. And we're going to begin here in verse 2 this morning. And I'm really going to be reading the text, kind of highlighting highlighting the history that's going on and moving quickly through this to get us, because we have application we need to get to at the end. So verse 2, let's begin. And now I will show you the truth. The angel tells Daniel, behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he's become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. So that's verse 2. And the first thing that he's revealing is that Persia is going to attack Greece. That's verse 2. And to put this in context, we're talking most likely about Xerxes the First, king of Persia. Incredibly rich king, relentlessly driven to expand the kingdom of Persia. In fact, we know Xerxes in about 480 BC raises a massive army, and he sets out to conquer all of Greece. In August of that year, his invasion of Greece is delayed in the mountain pass of Thermopylae. And if you're like, Mark, that doesn't matter to me, I don't care about it, have you ever heard about the 300 Spartans? If you have ever heard about that, that's the battle, Thermopylae. He's trying to get through the pass, and the Spartans slow him down. He finally makes it through. In his rage, he burns Athens to the ground. But he can't substantiate his victory because he loses his entire naval fleet to the Greeks at the Battle of Salamis. So all of his plans to take over Greece are thwarted. He leaves his army to keep fighting. He returns home. And most likely the events that happen in the book of Esther are occurring after these losses. Xerxes. So the first thing that God shows Daniel is that Persia is going to attack Greece. And without another word, 200 years of history are gone. God passes over 200 years of Persian history to transition to the Greek Empire. Yet it's interesting that even at the end, we see this kind of suggestion that it might very well be Xerxes' wealth and his military campaigns that seem to be the catalyst that catapults Greece onto the world stage. The attacks and his wealth compel Greece. Which brings us to the second thing that God reveals. Alexander will be great. No, Alexander's name isn't in the text here, but it reveals that Alexander will be great. Verse 3. Then a mighty king shall arise, speaking of a Greek king, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. This king here is Alexander the Great. And we know this because God's already revealed this transition on the world stage from Persia to Greece 3 different times in the book of Daniel. In chapter 2, the vision, in chapter 7, the vision, and in the vision of chapter 8, which is specifically focused on Greek and Persia. Even more, we know this king is Alexander here because the specific details that God reveals in verse 4. And as soon as he is arisen, that is this mighty king, his kingdom shall be broken and divided towards the 4 winds of heaven, not to his posterity, not according to the authority with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. Now, was Alexander great? Yes, he was. In a matter of 10 years. 10 years, he conquers Persia and Egypt and presses his conquests as far as modern-day India. He's amazing. He had great dominion. We're told in the text he did what he pleased. Nobody can stop him. But what happens to Alexander at the absolute height of his power in 332 BC? He suddenly gets sick and he dies in Babylon at the age of 32. 32 years old. And if this isn't absolute futility and frustration, nothing is. I mean, Alexander has so much more he can do. But he's dead. His army's unstoppable. He's dead. He's reigning over one of the largest empires of the ancient world, and he's dead. God gives him 27 words in the Hebrew. And he's wiped off the stage without a single celebration. And what do we see? His kingdom doesn't go to an heir. It doesn't stay with his family line. God says that before it ever happens. No, according to the angel and according to what we know in history, it's divided amongst his 4 generals, divided to the 4 winds. Alexander's kingdom is divided by 4. But as we follow God's revelation from verse 5 now to verse 20, what we're going to see is God doesn't really care at this moment about all 4 generals and all 4 parts of Alexander's kingdom. He only cares about 2. He's going to focus on the north and the south, the 2 generals in the north and the south. In the north, you don't have to remember this for the test at the end. His name is Seleucus I. He reigns over Syria, that is to the north of Israel. So every time you hear north, think Sirius, think the Seleucid Empire. Maybe somebody's going, I remember junior high. That's coming back to me. Okay? And then in the south, we have the general Ptolemy I, that is PT, not just T, silent P. Ptolemy, who rules over Egypt to the south. And his dynasty is the Ptolemaic dynasty. Right? So we'll hear some names as we go through, but just so we got north and we got south, we got Seleucids, we got Ptolemy. And the reason that God is focusing on these 2 kingdoms, not the 4 kingdoms, is that the people of God are going to be back in the land of Israel when all of this takes place. They're not going to be in Babylon anymore. They're going to be back in Israel. They're going to be released from exile. They're going to be living on that little sliver of land. That it's really the virtual crossroads of Africa and Asia and Europe, and it's going to be the little sliver of land that's going to be subject to a 400-year tug of war between empires. That is until we get to the very end today, which leads us to Antiochus Epiphanes IV and his rise to power, which we're not going to talk about till next week. So what's the next thing we see? Verse 5. We've got 3 predictions down, 6 to go. Here we have, they start getting even more detailed, and we find out that the north is going to be greater at first. Then the king of the south, that is Ptolemy, shall be strong. But one of his princes, that's one of Alexander's general, his name was Seleucus, is going to be stronger. And he's going to rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. Remember, all this is written well before it ever happens. This is God's revelation. So the 4th thing that God tells Daniel in verse 5 is the king of the north will be greater than the king of the south at first. In fact, we know this from history because Seleucus takes over the biggest part of Alexander's empire. He gets the big piece of the pie. And he rules over it from his capital in Syria. Yet as we transition to verse 6, God tells Daniel that these 2 kings aren't going to start out at war with each other. They're actually going to pursue a path of peace. Isn't that something for the Middle East? They're going to pursue a path of peace, and they're going to do it through a marriage alignment before anything ever happens between them. It sounds pretty good. Daniel 11, verse 6, after some years they shall make an alliance, that is the king of the north and the south, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an arrangement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and his arm shall not endure, but she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. So what do we see as the fifth thing? Notice we're trying to move through these in a way we can kind of get the big picture. The fifth thing that we see is that a north-south alliance is going to be frustrated. It's going to be frustrated. The king of the north and south, they want to make an alliance. But what's going to be the problem? She shall not retain the strength of her arm, and his arm shall not endure. What does that really mean? Well, we go to history, and we find out this very event happens in 250 BC. Ptolemy now the second, we're moving down the line, right? Ptolemy the second, the king of the south, gives his daughter Berenice to Antiochus the second, who is ruling in the north. And their agreement is this: hey, marry my daughter. Let's bring our kingdoms together, and the child of you and my daughter will rule over both of our kingdoms when we pass away. So they're trying to unite the kingdoms. They have a peace plan. They have the way they're going to get the next king. It's all arranged. And it looks great. It's a win-win situation. But there's a slight problem. The king of the north is already married. And his wife doesn't take kindly to the fact that she's getting kicked to the curb. So she gets kicked to the curb, and while her husband marries this new bride, and so what does she do? She waits, and she watches, and she plots. And gets her chance in 246 BC when she poisons Antiochus II, his new bride Berenice, their child, and all the royal attendants to ensure that her son Seleucus II is going to get to the throne. So why does this marriage alliance fall apart? It's not because the husband and wife aren't doing what they said they were going to do according to the treaty. It's because the wife that gets kicked to the curb says, I'm not standing for that. And she destroys everything. Thus fulfilling the prophecy in verse 6 that the strength of their arms will not endure. You see the frustration? You see the failure of the plans of men? Yet what do we see in this failed alliance? No matter how hard they try, it's not working. But on the other hand, we get to verse 7 and 8, and we actually see instantly right after this failure that the queen of the north, after she poisons everybody, her plan falls apart as well. She doesn't get to enjoy the fruits of her poisoning. Like she secures her own demise. Because the sixth thing that God shows Daniel is that the south is going to retaliate. They're not going to stand for it. Verse 7. And from a branch from her roots, that is, a branch from Berenice's roots, one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them, and he shall prevail. This comes to pass 2 years after the poisoning. 244 BC, Berenice's brother, Ptolemy now the third. We're moving through kings left and right. He invades Syria, he invades the kingdom of the north to retaliate for the murder of his sister. And in this retaliation, he not only captures the Syrian capital of Antioch, he executes his sister's murderer. And while he's up there, he looks around and goes, hey, look at all of these Egyptian relics that are stored up here. And he grabs all of these ancient Egyptian relics that were up in Syria, and he takes them back down to Egypt. All of these relics were taken by, way back in the day, by the Persian king Cambyses, and he did it in 525 BC. Hundreds of years before. He sees all this Egyptian stuff, says, now I'm taking that home. In fact, we're told about it in verse 8. He shall carry off to Egypt their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold. And for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Even the fact that he's going to bring the idols of Egypt back is included in the prophecy. So where are we at here? At the end of verse 8, we find the kingdoms of the north and south at a temporary stalemate. But it doesn't last long, because the seventh thing that God tells Daniel is that the north is going to retaliate. You see how this is going? Nobody's going to stand for what the other guy's doing. They keep punching back and forth. We get to verse 9. Then the latter, that is the king of the north, we're now at Seleucus II, shall come into the realm of the king of the south, that is Egypt, but he shall return to his own land. His sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. What's interesting to note here is that the angel here is predicting that this king is going to have sons, plural. Sons are going to carry on their father's campaign in Egypt. Not just a son. Sons are going to carry on this campaign. And this aligns with what we know of what happens in history. The king of the north, Seleucus II, has two sons. They co-rule the north for about 3 years until the first son dies in about 233 BC. And the second son, the co-ruling son, Antiochus III, ascends to the throne. In fact, history knows this man as Antiochus the Great. In fact, the rest of our passage this morning, the rest of the verses we have, are about this guy, Antiochus the Great, who continues to wage his father's campaigns against the king of the south. Everything is following Antiochus the Great. Which brings us to the eighth thing that God shows Daniel. The king of the south is going to make a final stand. The king of the south is going to make a final stand. Verse 11, then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north, and shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. We see this happen in 217 BC. When Ptolemy IV, notice we've made it from Ptolemy I to Ptolemy IV pretty quick, launches a massive counterattack against Antiochus III up in the north. Two armies clash in the Battle of Raphia, which is actually the largest battle in the Hellenistic era. And if you want to put it on the map in terms of modern day geography, it's actually pretty easy for anybody who's been watching the news. Everybody's seen the maps of the War of Gaza, and you've seen the southern entrance into Gaza from Egypt. That southern entrance into Gaza, Raphia, this battle takes place just south of that border crossing. That's where this battle, the Battle of Raphia, takes place. Just south of that modern-day border crossing. According to the historian Polybius, the Egyptians, that's the kingdom of the south, arrive on the scene to fight with 70,000 infantry, 5,000 cavalry, and 73 elephants. The Syrians, the kingdom of the north, had 62,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 102 elephants. That's like the equivalent of the tanks of the day. At the end of the battle, Ptolemy, that is the king of the south, was victorious. He lost 2,200 men, whereas Antiochus the Great lost 17,000 men. He destroyed him. And in this victory, he regained control not only over Israel, but he pushed as far as northern Syria. He expanded his empire up into the regions of the kingdom of the north. But at the end of the day, his victory did not secure his ultimate supremacy. His plans don't stand. His victory doesn't last. We get to verse 12. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands. He wins, but he shall not prevail. Once again, historians tell us that Ptolemy's decisive victory at Raphia didn't transition into influence, and it didn't turn into wealth. Rather, his victory fueled really his prideful arrogance and his life like pursuit of ever-increasing debauchery. He decides to live it up. He's the winner. He's going to have the time of his life. And he squanders everything that he gained. And it's interesting in this. It's really interesting that his plans here aren't frustrated by a foreign army. His plans aren't frustrated by internal betrayal. They're not frustrated by somebody poisoning and murdering him. No, they're frustrated by his own pride and his own lust for pleasure. Because in all of this, what does he do? He opens the door for the kingdom of the north to rebuild their army and come back at him 13 years later. I mean, I understand you go back and you have a party and you celebrate after you win. 13 years? They completely rebuild. Which brings us to the ninth and final revelation in our passage today. The north will rise to dominance. Verse 13. For the king of the north, Antiochus the Great, just in case you forgot who we were talking about, shall again raise a multitude greater than the first, greater than his army that was destroyed 13 years before. And after some years, he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies. That's to say, he's coming, he's here for payback. Verse 14, in those times many shall arise against the king of the south, and the violent among your people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. Now at this point, we kind of hit something new in the prophecy, and it's one of the few events in this entire section that we don't have a corresponding record of history for. We just don't have it. But what it appears that the angel is telling Daniel is that there's going to be some violent people among your people. Who's Daniel's people? Israel. There's going to be some violent people among the people of Israel that are going to join on with Antiochus and try to fulfill the rest of the vision that we're going to see unpacked over the next few weeks, because it ends within a very positive place for God's people. And they're going to think, hey, if we get on board, maybe we can kind of help God's prophecy and these visions happen a little bit quicker. And it's going to be because they see events around them that are corresponding to what Daniel says. And they're going to think, hey, we can maybe kickstart this thing and get it going faster. But they fail. We don't know from history how and when this happened, what it looked like, but it's something that God reveals. So let's get back to what we do see and we do know. Verse 15. Then the king of the north, Antiochus the Great, shall come up and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. Where we're probably at here is probably Antiochus' siege and capture of the city of Sidon in 198 BC, just north of Israel. And for any of you kids that have played those video games, the siege works are going up and the catapults are coming out. Like it's serious. This is siege warfare. He's putting on a siege. It lasts a couple years. He takes a city. But as we continue reading, he doesn't stop at Sidon. He doesn't stop there. He continues pressing to the south all the way in to the land of Israel. Verse 16, but he, again, Antiochus the Great, who comes against him, that is Ptolemy the Fourth, shall do as he will. Who's doing as he wills? Antiochus the Great. He's winning. His army's crushing everything in its path. He's going to do as he wills, and nobody's going to be able to stand before him. And he, Antiochus the Great, shall stand in the glorious land. Israel. He's going to stand in that land with destruction in his hand. Saying, whatever gets in his way, he's going to stomp. It's going to be destroyed. Verse 17, he shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. And he shall give the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. Now, let's kind of pull out a couple things that are a little, maybe not as apparent to us as we walk through this. The first, the obvious part, is that Antiochus the Great is going to be able to assert his dominance over Egypt as he assumes control of Israel. But the less obvious part is that Antiochus doesn't invade Egypt at this point. He doesn't do what everybody else has done, go into Egypt and smash it. Rather, while he's in Israel, right on their border, he sets up a peace treaty and a marriage alliance. He's going back to an old plan, a marriage alliance with the 4-year-old son of Ptolemy IV. As he sends his daughter Cleopatra, not the Cleopatra you just thought about. That's Cleopatra the 7th, the one that you're thinking about. This is Cleopatra the 1st. He sends Cleopatra down to be this new bride in hopes that Cleopatra is going to undermine her husband, take control, and give him surrogate control over Egypt. Well, once again, his plan's frustrated and it falls apart because his daughter Cleopatra goes down, gets married, and is more faithful to her new husband than she is to her father. All right, we're almost at the end. 3 verses to go. Verse 18. Afterward, he shall turn his face to the coastland. That's Antiochus the Great. And shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. Then he shall turn his face back towards the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. All right. We can take a breath. We're almost to the end of the history. But what happens here? What happens after Cleopatra double crosses her daddy? He turns his own army northwest, and he's trying to expand his kingdom, and he runs right into an ever-growing superpower in the ancient world known as Rome. And it doesn't go very well. The Roman general Scipio not only defeats Antiochus at the battles of Thermopylae and Magnesia in 190 BC, he forces Antiochus to pay an enormous amount of money in tribute to Rome to prevent further bloodshed. You know, it's kind of like mafia protection money. That's what he demands. Hey, everything will go good for you as long as you pay up. If you don't, we're going to be on your doorstep. So now Antiochus has a problem. Where's he going to find all this money that Rome wants? He looks around his empire and he recognizes that, gee, we have all of these temples to all of these gods and idols that are filled with treasure. I think it's time to rob the piggy bank. And he decides to go out and start pillaging temples to pay Rome off. But his plan didn't go very well because he was eventually killed in the city of Susa by an angry mob of worshipers who were trying to protect their temple. Worshippers, idol worshippers, put Antiochus the Great into the grave. In fact, this helps us understand the significance of our final verse this morning in verse 20. Then shall arise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. So Antiochus the Great bites the dust. But it doesn't matter, Rome still wants its money. So Antiochus' heir, who's Seleucus IV, decides, I got a great idea. I'm going to send out a tax collector. He's going to get things put together. We're going to keep the Romans all happy. We're going to have their money for them. But when his tax collecting plan fell apart, he was quickly put to death. He was poisoned and replaced by his brother, a man that we know in history, and you've probably heard of before, called Antiochus IV, who later becomes known as Antiochus Epiphanes. He's a pretty bad dude, and we're going to talk more about him next week. I mean, I mean, he's a guy that's so bad that he is actually the template. He's the pattern after which the Antichrist is described. So at this point, the three people that are here at church today who really enjoy history are going, man, it was great. And everybody else is going, I don't even know what to do with this. Is this finally over? We need to now move to application. And I know with communion we're pressing time a little bit, but we're getting to the end here. We actually need to ask the question, so what? We cannot stop by just saying, look, here's a prophecy. Look, here's history. Ta-da. Like, what does it matter? I mean, like one of the questions that my mentor would ask me often, we'd talk about preaching and stuff over coffee, and it's like his bottom line question was, who cares? It was great. Good stuff for a young preacher. Who cares? You did all that research. Who cares? So what we're going to say is like, who cares? Why does it matter? And that brings us to the two things that God shows us. We see two things in this. God is always for his people, and God is never frustrated. God is always for his people, and God is never frustrated. That is to say, God is sovereign. So the first, God is always for his people. How do we see this in Daniel is we got to remember that all of this flows out of Daniel 9 and 10 that happened. We went through those like over 6 weeks ago. So we got to kind of pull the chapters back together again that have been divided up by a number of weeks. Because if we go back, you just turn your Bible back to Daniel chapter 9, what do you see? Daniel's crying out to God in prayer. He's repenting of his people's sin. He's begging God to forgive them and to return them to their land out of exile. He's saying, God, you said there was going to be a 70-year timeline. That timeline's done. Please send us back. You said you were going to do it. And how does God respond to Daniel's prayer? Well, we see in Daniel 10 that God sends this angel who's evidently been locked in spiritual combat. We talked about that. Tons of things we don't understand about it. But the angel's primary message is this. Daniel, I know as you look at your life experience and you look at where your people are at right now, you don't feel it at the moment, but you are greatly loved. You don't sense it. All of your experience in life would tell you that you're not. But I'm here to tell you, you are greatly loved. God loves you. And what does the angel do next? Chapter 10, verse 21, we're told he reads from God's book of truth. And he tells Daniel exactly what he needs to hear about the future of his people and God's work on his behalf. He turns to the pages that Daniel needs. He doesn't give him the whole book. He gives him a couple pages. And we see like how is God treating Daniel in these verses? He's treating him with love, and we're able to see how does God treat his people. Because we can often feel like God doesn't know, or God knows and God doesn't care. God is sovereign, he's powerful, but he's not able. But no, he's always for his people. And as Christians, we know that this isn't just an Old Testament truth. No, God's love is displayed far greater for us in the New Testament, isn't it? And that is because the very same God who loves you and knows exactly what you need has demonstrated his love by sending his own Son, Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, not an angel. Daniel gets an angel. Who do you get? You get Jesus. And even more, when God sends Jesus, God doesn't send him to give us a short message about stuff that's going to happen in the future, though Jesus does talk about stuff, and he does talk about the future. It doesn't stop there. No, Jesus lays down his life for our sins. God is always for his people. 1 John 4, 9 through 10. In this the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. And this is the love. And this is love, not that we've loved God. That's the key. We weren't loving God. We didn't want God. We didn't care about God. But he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation, the wrath-bearing sacrifice for our sins. But the good news is that God's love doesn't end for us at the cross. God's being for you does not stop there. We can only highlight a couple small pieces of Romans 8 at the moment. Romans 8:31, Paul says, "What shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us?" And he's already argued that God is for us. He who didn't spare his own Son, but gave him up for us, how will he not with him give us, He who did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? He's arguing from the greater to the lesser. There's no greater thing that God can give than Jesus Christ. Anything you ever need in your life is small compared to what he's already given. That's why you can know that God is for you. We get to verse 38 of chapter 8. "For I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers," as Americans we need to hear that, "nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in creation shall be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord." God is always for his people. That's what we see. So Christian, if you feel distant from God, you find yourself wondering, does God even love me? Does he really care? I mean, we can actually see it in Daniel chapter 9 through 11. We can certainly see it in the Gospels and Jesus dying on the cross for our sins. Yes, he loves you more than you can ever comprehend, and his commitment to you is far greater than you can fathom. In fact, this truth is bolstered by the second thing that we see in our text today. That God is never frustrated. God's never frustrated. Parents, just think about it. We can love our children, we can love our friends, and we can want very good things for them. Right? We love them. We want good stuff for them. But here's the rub. We don't have the power to make it happen, do we? We can save money for college. We can do all sorts of things. We can do all sorts of prep work. We can try to put them into the right programs. We can try to arrange all the things out in front of them. Plan out the perfect homeschool curriculum. You can't cause it to happen. You don't have the power. You cannot ensure that your dreams and your desires and your love and your hopes will come to reality. You can't. We are not sovereign like God is. We're not. But as we consider the prophecy in these 20 verses that covers over 400 years of history, what do we see? We see that these kings, God's enemies, are constantly frustrated. That's what we see. They're frustrated. As one scholar notes, if we underline the conjunction "but" in these verses, we would underline 13 events that did not go according to plan. And this is what we see. We see the folly and the frustration and the futility of these kings and their kingdoms. Alexander's greatness is nothing more than a flash in the pan. The early attempts to unify the north and the south through this marriage ends in disaster. Powerful kings can't secure their overwhelming victories. Disobedient daughters destroy their father's plans for conquest. And in the end, Antiochus's heir dies not by a mob or killed in battle, but through outright betrayal. And at every turn, these kings are frustrated. Their plans fall apart. But who is never frustrated? God's never frustrated. That's why there's so much detail in this text. But how can we know? How can we know that God is behind these things? And I know we're pressing for time here. Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 13 points us to the answer. Habakkuk points us to the fact that the failure and the frustration of kings is one of the ways that God judges the nations and he magnifies his sovereign control over all things. Let's go to Habakkuk 2, verse 13. Behold, is it not from the Lord? Is it not from the Lord of hosts that people labor merely for fire? They work, they try, they do everything. They're working, all they can do is get the most basic necessities, fire, to heat and to maybe cook. And is it not from the Lord of hosts that the people's labor merely for fire and the nations weary themselves for nothing? God is saying, when you see that happening, it's an evidence of my judgment and my work. When countries work and try and all of their efforts come to nothing, we can say God is at work in this. It's to be a sign things are not good. When nations and kings and presidents and political parties weary themselves for nothing, something far greater is going on behind the scenes. And this is the message we need to hear today. As we look at this death spiral, it seems like we're locked in our country and our parties. Yet in all of this, God is not frustrated. He's never frustrated. And it's because the title of God's book in Daniel 10, verse 21, is not the book of things that God hopes will happen. No. It's called the book of truth. And it's because everything that God says will happen, will happen. And this is good because God's people, even when we can't see the good that God is working, we can know that no matter what happens, he is for us and he is working for the good of his people, which is why we say, don't trust in the kingdoms of men because their fragile plans are always subject to the sovereign hand of God. I'm going to close in prayer, and I'm going to call an audible as we close, that we won't have our closing hymn this morning, but I'll conclude in a benediction after prayer.